This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everyone. I am Danny Wally, and this is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight, we're talking teaching and learning and reviewing some classroom crazes. Is technology in classrooms a revolution or a recipe for distraction? Did growth mindset help kids or make I hate maths sound a bit more positive? Let's unpack the trends that transformed or totally tumbled in today's classrooms.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening, everybody. I am Danny Wally, and this is the Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you so much for joining me live tonight. It's going to be a show tonight that really requires audience participation, so please get ready to text in, maybe call in if you want to, on the Podbean app and talk to me with your feedback. If you're not listening live, then that's great, but please make sure that you're also engaging and commenting with your social media and telling me what your thoughts are. Tonight, I wanted to review some of the trends in teaching and learning over the past decade, and I wanted us to work together to decide, was there merit in some of these trends that have come and gone? Have they really helped students to learn or even to develop as human beings? And have we seen the light with some of them and moved on, never to go back again? Now, when I was thinking about putting this show together and I was reflecting on it, I've been in teaching and learning for about a decade, which I know is not long compared to some of the listeners. But even just in that decade, I was thinking about some of the trends or fads, if you would, that I have been trained in and actually led training in myself when it comes to teaching and learning. And even just on my reflection, I managed to write down cooperative learning, inquiry-based learning, flipped learning, growth mindset, direct instruction, and now we've moved post-COVID into the world of edutech. And it got me thinking, are these strategies that are actually good for the children? And are they leading to better outcomes? Because if they are, why have we scrapped them? And if they aren't, why did we do them in the first place? And one of the things that I was reflecting on, because I love to tell a little story, as you know, on the show, and I was thinking about when I first started to get involved in whole school teaching and learning and, you know, contributing to staff CPD and things like that. And some of the first things that I myself was trained on, and like I say, participated in training of others, was Kagan. And this idea of cooperative learning. And I look back now, and honestly, and I totally accept I'm probably not doing Kagan justice with this anecdote, but I remember being stood on a chair in the middle of our theatre with 65 teachers of varying expertise walking around with me with their hands in the air, high-fiving each other, seeing which one had the biggest hand and therefore had to choose, and playing, you know, kind of verbal tennis. And then I'm stood on a chair with my hand in the air, quietly nodding at them when I want their attention. And I look back now and just think, how was I allowed to do that? You know, I'm not advocating against cooperative learning. You know, we'll talk about it in a minute. It absolutely has its strengths, but there is that part of me that just cringes a little bit that is what I had adults doing and adults practicing as part of their teacher development. And I look back at where, certainly, and I appreciate this might just be my experience, but I look back at where I've gone in my time in teaching, from cooperative learning, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, and how we've kind of gone that full swing now to what I think is, direct instruction. And as a profession, it seems to me anyway, and I appreciate that my sources here are social media and Twitter and LinkedIn and Blue Sky and things, but it does seem to me that as a profession, we've taken quite a big pendulum swing away from this idea of cooperative learning, and we've moved back towards direct instruction and more traditional approaches to teaching and learning, which are really quite focused and based around teacher exposition. And I think as I was like reflecting on this and thinking, I just thought, isn't that interesting? Because, cooperative learning and Kagan certainly share similarities in terms of the student engagement or with direct instruction. If we take the Engelman version, the levels of high frequency engagement from the students. But actually, in practice, in a lot of places, they couldn't look more different. And it made me think, well, which one's right? Which one should we be doing? Should we be doing collaborative learning, Kagan? My school at the time, when this was a fad, and that is the phrase I'm using for all of these tonight, was really, really keen on this idea that students had to get up every lesson. So, and I appreciate the science that they shared behind it, and it was to do with, energy going to the brain and getting students engaged in their learning. But it was that idea of, right, get up, walk around the room, find your partner, high five, have this conversation. And that was seen as a way of getting students to engage in their learning. Now, I think now, if I was to do a learning walk of, say, 50 classrooms, I think I would probably see children out of their seats moving around in that lesson, providing it wasn't a practical lesson like science, for example, probably once, maybe twice. We just seem to have moved so far away from this idea of students getting up and talking and getting involved that I think was kind of dominating this field 10 years ago. So I'll say it again. I really want your input tonight. I really want to know what you think. Please text in live, particularly if you've got any anecdotes or experiences or, funny stories to share regarding cooperative learning strategies or any of the strategies that we're going to talk about tonight. And let me know what you think. I appreciate I can only ever really talk about my experiences with them, but what were yours? And cooperative learning, were they on to something? Is that something that we should be doing more in the classroom? So I've referenced Kagan. I am talking more generally about cooperative learning, partly so I don't get sued by Kagan, honestly. But what is it? Let's start with that. So I'm talking about this idea of promoting student engagement through group work, and certain strategies were advocated for and promoted through cooperative learning, like think, pair, share, which I'm sure some people will still use now, round robin. And actually, we can go much more complicated with some of them, where there were specific strategies in terms of students pairing up and one being a student and one being a teacher, etc. Now, if we just evaluate some of the strengths and weaknesses, then let's go through and talk about Kagan, or cooperative learning, I should say, really. Now, I think there are some real strengths in this. And again, I'll say it again, I really want your opinions. But when I was thinking about this, there is a massive shift in the moment, I think, particularly, again, I'll say it again, social media is my source. But I do go to a lot of educational conferences and research-ed conferences. And there's a big thing at the moment about oracy. And I really respect that. And I really value oracy as such an important thing that we need to be teaching our students for loads of different reasons: self-esteem, for job applications, for confidence levels. And didn't collaborative learning do that? We're talking about building oracy into lessons, but isn't getting students to articulate their thoughts and their feelings and share them with a partner and then actively listen to their partner's ideas, which is in essence what collaborative learning is, doesn't that improve oracy? And if that's the case, why are people who are advocating for oracy now so passionately not going back to collaborative learning strategies? That's just something I thought was interesting. And it also made me think about, it does break the ice in classrooms when you've got new groups in September that don't really know each other. It gives shy students a voice, so students who don't always want to put their hand up and be forthcoming. And actually we could argue that with some of these collaborative learning strategies, they did facilitate psychological safety. Take think, pair, share, for example. The idea is that they think about their own ideas first, then they share them with their partner, and then it's fed back to the teacher. Well, again, and I am playing devil's advocate a little bit, but think about, we've got a huge increase nationally in students with SEMH and anxiety levels. And I don't know about everybody else, but I've got quite a few students within my school where I know I'm not to cold call and ask them a question and put them on the spot because it gives them anxiety. Well, again, isn't Think, Pair, Share an amazing solution to that? They get think time, they talk to a partner before anybody is going to ask them to publicly share their ideas. But again, I come back to, it seems to me anyway, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like we've really shifted away from that as a profession. We've really moved away from collaborative learning. So then I started to think about, well, I wonder why that's happened. So I started to think about, well, what's the critique? So, and again, please let me know what you think. It can lead to really difficult group dynamics. So, for example, if you've got that student who really likes to do the talking and maybe dominate some of the groups, for example, then it might mean that they work a little bit more than other people. And I see that as a difficulty. I also accept that by giving students that freedom to collaborate and have those conversations, that certain discussions might veer off track. I've got a couple of comments which I absolutely love, so thank you so much for texting and talking to me. Oh yeah, Kelly's put here, shouldn't we take into account learning styles? Oh my god, yeah, I didn't even think of that. Oh yeah, the whole visual kinetic, that was absolutely a fad. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if we get time we should definitely go back to that, because I totally agree. In terms of Kagan, though, I'm a big believer in teamwork, getting students to work together and share ideas and thoughts. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a real positive in getting students to value their own opinions, but also to actively listen to those of others. But yeah, another comment, will students get many misconceptions from other people? And I totally agree. And again, with the cooperative learning strategies, I mean, particularly my school at that time, they really paired cooperative learning, or collaborative learning, I should say, with the 80-20 ratio. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Back in the day, but that makes me sound old. But that idea of 80% of the lesson needs to be student-led and only 20% can be teacher-led. And actually that links in very much to the chat comment there. Do we get too many misconceptions from others? Well, actually, I would advocate, that surely your teacher is in the classroom because they're an expert. So is there a opportunity there? Should the teacher be leading the teaching? Because actually, could a lot of collaboration lead to misconceptions? Yeah, I totally agree with that. So the other thing that I was thinking about, with collaborative learning strategies, because we'll go to our vote in a minute, because we've got quite a few that I think could be really great for us to talk to. So I'm hoping that you'll give me a little bit of feedback and maybe we can vote on whether we think that this was a helpful trend and a success for the students, or something that was quite rightly binned, or certainly not the main focus of teaching and learning now. One of the things I thought about with my experience with collaborative learning was behaviour. Now, I remember we used to have teaching and learning groups at the time, and I remember kind of sharing strategies and things at this group, and we'd have discussions and openly talk about where and when we think some of these strategies might be appropriate. And some of the hesitation that came from a lot of the staff was this idea of, if we let children, like, I want to say kind of let them go. Do you know what I mean? Like, if we release them, and that idea of get up and move around the room and listen to music, and then when the music stops, high five a partner and talk to someone new and do all of these things, does that make it potentially more difficult to manage behaviour? And actually, is that why some teachers have shied away from it? And that makes me think, so is it that actually this was a great strategy, but we've moved away from it because we've got more concern about behaviour? I mean, I really am trying to play devil's advocate here, because obviously I don't know why we've moved away from it, but it certainly is something. I tend to think in education, and I do think we swing from one thing to the other. And I do think we're a profession that really throws themselves 100% into the current trend. But unfortunately, 3 or 4 years later, that current trend could be something completely different. And I remember speaking to much more experienced teachers than me who constantly use this phrase about reinventing the wheel. And they say things like, they're constantly amending and changing resources and schemes of learning. But actually, the ones that were being used 10 years ago, or they'll be the ones that they go back to now, because it does always go full swing. And I think that's really what planted this idea. So yeah, let me know, what do you think? What are we thinking about Kagan here? I've got lots of comments on the chat from Pat, so thank you so much, Pat. Had an observation today, SLT like the students lead learning in the workshop. Yeah, definitely. I'm openly dyslexic. I tell my students that it helps everyone working together. I totally agree. It sounds to me, Pat, like you're advocating for the benefits of collaborative learning that we mentioned, and I totally agree. But what do we think in terms of, do we think that behaviour is why we've moved moved away from this then? Because if we're feeling pretty positive about collaborative learning and the benefits of that in the classroom, is the reason we've moved away from that not necessarily then because it isn't effective? Is it because people are maybe struggling to hold children together in terms of behaviour? So leaders in education are always looking for fads and easy fixes to improve outcomes. Oh, I totally agree with that. I totally agree. And don't you think, actually, we're probably going a bit off task here, but don't you think actually if you correlated that the change in schools foci, you would probably see quite a strong correlation with staffing changes, because you get a new senior leader, don't you, who, you know, just takes over something and has a completely different vision or an idea of how it should be done totally differently, and they'll spend 5 years overhauling what happened before, and then they might move on to somewhere else. And yeah, I definitely think, and that comment is getting a lot of agreement in the chat as well. But I think, to me, we need to start pushing back on that a little bit, because I started at the very beginning actually saying, when we're evaluating these strategies, we've got to put the kids at the heart of this evaluation, surely. You know, even if we are talking about that idea of teachers possibly being a little bit hesitant with strategies like Kagan because of that idea of, you know, students maybe running around the room or causing behaviours that might be slightly more challenging to calm, that's not a reason to not do something if we think it's going to make a difference on students' outcomes. So I think we've got a bit of a double whammy evaluation here, haven't we? Where on one hand, is it effective for the students in terms of their outcomes? And on another hand, is it something that just maybe wasn't favoured by the staff at the time? Okay, so back to the chat. So teachers are scared that movement might hinder a child's ability to learn well in a lesson, and it can be disruptive. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what I was saying really with this idea of, is it a behaviour nightmare? And is that the reason we've left it in the dust, really? You know, I can imagine my vice principal that I work with, who's in charge of behaviour, is absolutely amazing. But I feel like I can channel her at the moment, and her frustration, really, that behaviour and staff would kind of allow a control over behaviour to be a reason that a lesson becomes less engaging, because we talk quite regularly about how actually the root cause of poor behaviour sometimes and low level disruption can be poor teaching and learning. And actually it's that circular argument, isn't it, you know, that what came first, the chicken or the egg? If we don't do engaging and relevant teaching and learning strategies because we're afraid of behaviour, we're probably more likely to have behaviour issues if the teaching and learning is boring and unengaging. And again, I think that's a really interesting point to consider here when we're evaluating these strategies. So teachers should take calculated risks to challenge the learning students and to promote more creativity and independent learning. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's that, I really enjoy that phrase there, that calculated risks, because we need to be doing things that are engaging the students in what we're doing. I use the phraseology in my academy a lot about thinking deeply, about powerful knowledge. So we need to facilitate that environment. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't talk to their partner about it. It does mean with certain classes, you might not put the music on and tell them to walk around the room and high five each other. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't room for collaborative learning. So a calculated risk is and must always be well planned, scaffolded, and not just trying to be cool to engage. Yeah, again, totally agree. And I personally, again, reflecting, I think that's where that idea of letting kids walk around to music and high five, to some teachers, you know, made them want to barf and was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. But to other teachers was like, yeah, cool, let's put the music on. And like you say, we shouldn't be making decisions for that. It should all come down to how we can get our students engaged. So speaking with our ECT, he asked how long it takes to get control of behaviour to try new things. And I just said, try new things, don't worry, and give them a go. Yeah, totally. And I almost wish that as a profession, we felt a little bit more comfortable to do that in our classrooms. Just a little fact that I've got for you here then, because I love a bit of research, and I did kind of delve into the books and the internet really to see, well, what's the research behind some of these fads then? So we've evaluated our experiences and our opinions, but I just want to share this with you then. So there was research conducted by Johnson & Johnson in 2013 that said that students in cooperative learning environments show higher academic achievement and more positive relationships with their peers. Now, this research actually really made me think about what we were talking about 2 weeks ago, for those of you that tuned in, when we were amazingly fortunate and honoured to have Tom Bennett on the show. And we were talking to Tom about implementing behaviour curriculums and this idea of positively teaching children behaviour and positive behaviour, so how to be successful. And this fact really made me think. I did assemblies actually this week about talking to children again about the behaviours that we want to see from them. And I'm always talking to them about manners and kindness and listening to each other. But then it made me think, if we've taken that out the classroom, if we don't facilitate opportunities for children to talk to each other, to listen to someone sharing an opinion, then aren't we almost undoing what we're driving with behaviour? You know, is it that point where quality of education is almost its own worst enemy? Because if we're not giving children the opportunity to practice and develop these skills, how can we expect them to show it to us in the corridor or to the lunch lady when they're picking up their dinner if we haven't encouraged I'm talking really more think, pair, share, I suppose, on a bit of a lower level here. But, thank you for listening. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your feedback within a classroom environment where it's potentially a bit safer. So let me know what you think. Again, I've got a little bit more research. I won't bore you with it, but a lot of the research that I was looking at today talked about how Kagan and collaborative and cooperative learning strategies can be really positive in the classroom. So an American study found that cooperative learning classrooms performed 22% better than those in traditional classrooms when it came to problem solving skills. So again, the research is airing towards cooperative learning. What do you think? I'm going to go to the chat in a minute. Let's have your vote. Do we think collaborative learning, is it a success? Was it a failure? Do we need to bring it back into our classrooms? Let me know what you think. I'm going to switch on to our ads. So a quick word from our sponsors, and then I will come back and we will make a decision. What are we saying about cooperative learning, success or failure? I'll be back in a minute.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
Okay, welcome back. So I've just had a quick look through our chat, and I think the vote is generally saying that cooperative learning is a success. So that's really interesting because, again, reflecting on my role as assistant principal of teaching and learning, I've certainly moved our CPD away from cooperative learning. So I really appreciate your feedback, and maybe that's something I need to look at, putting back in the classroom, because we've evaluated it, we've looked at the research, and the jury's in. You are saying success. There's a really good comment here as well, though, which says one style may work in one school and doesn't work in another. And I totally agree. And I think we've mentioned it a bit earlier in the chat as well, that actually it's calculated risks, isn't it? And those calculated risks might vary across classrooms. So you might have one class where they really respond positively and have really kind of engaging conversations. And there might be another class where they're just not confident enough to do that. And actually we need to build their confidence towards engaging in these tasks. Many children with SEN need frequent movement breaks. Yeah, I agree. And I remember that being something that certainly my Kagan training really advocated for. And it talks about how some of your some of the students where it can be a little bit more challenging to capture their attention might benefit from getting up and walking around the room, talking to a different partner, hearing a different viewpoint, etc. Many occupational therapists recommend that children take regular movement breaks. Yeah, I totally agree. And then Kelly's put on the chat, there are so many different theories relating to teaching and learning. How do we decide which is best? And I concur. And actually, that's why we're doing this show to an extent, isn't it, really, so that we can debate some of these? Because, as was said in the chat, some are really successful in some schools, some aren't in others. I think as well, although I'm kind of, spoiler alert, blowing where I think we were going to end, is that idea of, I think actually there's a middle ground to everything and to all of these fads that we're going to talk about tonight. Because, I mean, do I think I'm going to go back to my academy tomorrow and run a CPD session on how we need to get all of our children stood up with our arms in the air, walking around to music, and when the music stops, we need to high five each other and we need to play a game of verbal tennis? Like, no, I'm not, honestly, but not because I'm looking down on that. I'm not, but it's not where we are, and it's not what we need right now. Actually, at the moment, we need students to really be thinking deeply about their learning. So it's just, to me, that our focus is a little bit different. However, do I think there's room in our classrooms for think, pair, share, for collaboration, conversation, active listening? Yeah, I 100% do. And I think, to me, possibly, I mean, that's certainly where I sit on Kagan, is that it's that middle ground. So for me, I feel like I'm being told off in the chat. It's easy to scoff at things that we regard as silly or faddish, but that doesn't mean that they're not legitimate strategies out there to support some of our children to behave that have rightful place in our schools. Totally. Without them, we run the risk of disadvantaging some of the children who already find schools and classrooms difficult. Exactly. And I'm hoping actually that what I've just said does cover that, really, because I totally respect that different schools, different climates, different situations, everybody needs different strategies for different children in different situations. And I certainly would never, ever scoff at that. I think my scoff is almost coming from the fact that my personal experience in education is, it feels anyway, very much all or nothing. I remember working in an academy that fully adopted Kagan principles, and it wasn't a middle ground. It was we all do this every lesson, in every situation, whether they're solving problems or learning the consonants, it doesn't matter. That's what they're doing. And I think actually what I'm saying is, personally, I think we need to have that middle ground. Okay, right, moving on, because I feel like we've evaluated Kagan beautifully. I've got quite a few actually that we could talk about, and I do really love in the chat that you guys have pointed out tonight that we've possibly missed an opportunity here to talk about learning styles, and maybe we run this over 2 shows because there's that many fads in education that we can go through. I've got growth mindset, flipped learning, direct instruction. I tell you what, let's go from one extreme to the other. Let's do a little bit of a look here on direct instruction. I don't know about everybody else, and please text in and talk to me and tell me. My experience in education over the past 5 years certainly is that we have come back round to this idea of direct instruction. And again, my engagement and things that I've seen on Twitter would certainly suggest that there are other professionals, certainly within my network, that tend to have gone back to direct instruction as well. So what is direct instruction? Well, how long have you got? I found it really difficult to summarise direct instruction in a sentence, partly because those of you who are familiar with direct instruction will know there's about 25 versions of direct instruction. If we take direct instruction without the capital letters, then direct instruction, in theory, is a structured, teacher-centred approach focusing on clear, explicit teaching of skills and knowledge. Now, Engelman is probably the most famous, I would say, practitioner who worked within direct instruction, and his reference to direct instruction is often capitalised. I don't know if that's a helpful little tip for people who do a lot of reading around this in order to be able to differentiate between the two. I feel like Engelman is the direct instruction that most people possibly misunderstand. Certainly in my experience, seem to, if it's not implemented, I think, really well, there's possibly lethal mutations that can come from the Engelman approach, where teachers kind of take a very small facet of it. And if it's possibly misunderstood, it can be implemented quite poorly. I've got a comment in the chat already about this, which is amazing, that says, when direct instruction is done well, it can be done really well and have an impact. But when it's done poorly, it can mutate into teacher-led lessons where students are bored and not engaged. Yeah, I totally agree. And you're one step ahead of me here in the evaluation of this. So I've got here, let's do the successes. Let's follow the same pattern as Kagan, so I don't want anyone to start calling me bias here. So, okay, so direct instruction in terms of its successes. So the successes, there is a massive amount of research, and I'll share some of it with you in a moment, that comments on the success of direct instruction, particularly, it seems, around fundamental skills like maths and literacy. And actually, where direct instruction is implemented sequentially and thoroughly, and those lethal mutations don't occur, it can have a massive difference in progress. So again, I was looking here, if we take the Engelman version, just to give you a little bit of research, Hattie's effect size of direct instruction is positive 0.59. And if you compare that with others like inquiry-based learning, which only ever got to positive 0.31, you can see the difference that it makes in student outcomes. However, and I know that we're generalising, those of you who are sitting there listening thinking there's a lot to direct instruction that I'm skirting over. I promise I'm not skirting over it, but it has been quite widely criticised as limiting student creativity, because every facet of a direct instruction lesson is very, very well planned. And often it will avoid rearing off where, sometimes you're teaching a lesson and it just steers off in a certain direction and one student's got an amazing idea and you discuss that for a little bit. And it really relies on strong and well-planned, I've just mentioned, teacher exposition. So I think my question here, and come on, talk to me. You've been amazing tonight, and I'm so grateful to everybody that's engaged and texted in. So my question is then, does direct instruction limit staff agency? So while you're talking to me on the chat and telling me what you think, does it limit staff freedom, staff agency, teachers' freedom? I'm just going to give you a little bit more information to my understanding, because again, I absolutely do not profess to be an expert on direct instruction, but certainly Engelman's direct instruction. So just a couple of facts and figures things here for you to consider when we're evaluating this. According to Engelman, 15% of every lesson should be new content. 15. And actually, that's been quoted in other texts that I've read as 10. And 85%, or obviously 90%, should be either reviewing previous content or application of that content. Now, I remember a lot of conversations here with senior leaders who I really, really respect about this. And ultimately, you can't ignore with that the fact that means that certain cohorts will not finish specifications. And I feel like I'm about to jump in a moral hole here that I'm going to really regret. But is that okay? If we take, again, so one of the other bits that Engelman really talks about with direct instruction is this idea of mastery, and his interpretation and an explanation almost of teaching for mastery is this idea of you don't move on until the student has mastered the content. And actually what that might mean is that you regroup students. So he talks quite passionately, honestly, about not grouping children or setting children within secondary school settings based on preconceived ability. He talks about how settings should be fluid and children should be set for their mastery level on certain skills and aspects of content. Now, again, and I am playing devil's advocate a little bit tonight, because there are bits of direct instruction, or I suppose almost the premise of direct instruction, that I cannot disagree with. But playing devil's advocate a little bit, you've got a low ability group of students that you are teaching a content heavy curriculum to, and you don't move on until they've mastered that facet of content. There is no way you're going to cover that exam spec. Is that okay? Is that what's right for them? Have you met their need there? Because actually their target grade, for example, might be a grade 4 and you've taught them enough content to get a grade 4. So is that okay? Is there a moral argument there that you've potentially capped them and you've not challenged them or had high expectations for them and taught them enough to potentially get a 6? What are your thoughts on this, guys? What are your thoughts on this idea of direct instruction? Is that right, that we don't necessarily cover the content with students? So let's go to the chat. You guys are amazing tonight. Thank you so much for how much you are texting and talking. So we've got I agree with Kelly. I feel less inspired when direct instruction was the focus within my school. Oh, that's interesting. So the idea of a teacher feeling less inspired. And I wonder, and please come back to me, Bethany, and let me know, was that because you felt like you weren't able to teach the way you wanted to? Is that because you felt like you were following a specific structure with direct instruction? Let me know on the chat. Okay, surely it's better to have a thorough knowledge of skills rather than go through the content like a train and students not be able to recall it. Yeah, I think that's a really great comment. But I think as well, we're going down a hole here, because can you teach skills without content? Should you focus on skills and not content? I mean, again, and I'm playing devil's advocate, but if our content is powerful knowledge, so if we take a Key Stage 3 curriculum, say, where we've got a little bit more autonomy over selecting that content, if you've selected powerful knowledge, which you truly believe will support your students, say they've come from a disadvantaged background, that you believe that will give them a social boost, etc., surely you should be focusing on content then and not skills. Let me know, guys. Let me know what you think. So I've got a couple more here. So it depends on the subject. Yeah, I agree. If we go back through some more information then about direct instruction. So I've got here, direct instruction advocates for a strand curriculum. Now, I know that this particularly has been the source of heated conversation, certainly in my career, but it's that idea that every lesson is organised around multiple skills and topics, not one. Now, this to me is very much in line with desirable difficulties. And again, I feel like there's I hope I'm not wrong on this, but I feel like there's a research ed book. Is it a research ed book? There's definitely a book coming out anyway, where they've kind of delved into desirable difficulties. And the original paper was by Bjork and Bjork, and it's really insightful. And I feel like that's been applied a little bit more to more recent education. And desirable difficulties, very similar to direct instruction here, advocates for this idea of making students do things that doesn't necessarily feel like they're learning. So, for example, if you were to speak to students about how do they feel they revise the most effectively, they'd probably tell you that they rewrite their notes or highlight information on one topic for one night. But actually, literature suggests that they will have the revision will have a much greater impact on them if they revise, say, 4 topics for 15 minutes a night, and they mix and match and interleave those topics. So, again, a specific example might be in history. I'm a history teacher, but in history, if you're teaching Nazi Germany and you're also teaching, crime and punishment throughout time, rather than just teach the whole of Nazi Germany until they get to the end and then move on to crime and punishment, it might be that you are teaching 2 lessons or 1 lesson on Nazi Germany, and then you move to 1 lesson on crime and punishment. And actually, what the idea of desirable difficulties, and again, this strand curriculum from Engelman, is that it won't feel great to students. It will make them feel a little bit undesirable, a little bit unconfident in their recall, and they might mix up some of the recall. But in the long term, encoding information and learning information like that is much better and makes that information move into long-term memory. And that's very similar to this strand curriculum from Engelman. So that idea of, say, in a maths lesson, you don't spend an entire lesson solving equations. You spend 15 minutes solving equations, and then you might go on to area of a triangle, and then you might go on to something else. And making sure that those skills are then distributed into future lessons. But again, that's quite a big overhaul, particularly in my experience in education, to go in and start saying, we need to teach our curriculum through these strands and these desirable difficulties for pupils would be quite a big overhaul. But, if that's what the literature is saying is best for the students, is that what we should be doing? Let me know what you think. Okay. On to the chat then. I think there's surely a level of skills and content in practical, not one or the other. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's getting a lot of agreement in the chat as well. I think teachers need more autonomy to make the right decisions for the students they're working with. Teachers need to be trusted. They need to be able to have the time to get to know their students and deliver lessons that will engage them best in order to assure the best outcomes for all learners. Yes, I totally. So I personally, it's only my personal opinion, I personally am a big advocate for teacher agency, not autonomy, teacher agency. I absolutely think teachers have to have a voice. What I would say though, and I'm almost just providing an alternative viewpoint onto that one, Natty, is do all teachers have strong enough mental models, for example, to make the right decisions for their students? I'm not criticising any teachers. What I'm saying is, if you take maybe a teacher who's slightly newer to the profession or hasn't necessarily taught within that subject or taught that group of students before, but they're still the sole teacher of that class, for example, if their mental model of what good teaching in that area looks like, if that mental model isn't strong enough or isn't secure enough, then is it right that we let them make the decision about how that should be taught for those children? I think I would say on that one that personally, I wouldn't want to move towards that complete autonomy for staff until I was secure, and I'm thinking more, I suppose, now as a leader, until I was secure that their mental model was correct and actually almost conducive to learning. So I think there's a two-sided argument to all of this, isn't there? And what I'm really loving and what I think we need to do a bit more of in education is this discussion and actually this debate where we're going through some of these things and we're saying, well, is this what we should be doing? I think it was Kelly much earlier in the chat said, how are you ever supposed to know what teaching and learning approach you're supposed to take? And I totally agree. And I agree actually with some of the comments that are coming through about it is different circumstances and different situations. Another thing that direct instruction, particularly the Engelman, but actually a lot of direct instruction without the capitals, does talk about is this quality of teacher exposition. So Engelman, for example, talks about faultless communication. And at its extreme, that facet of direct instruction talks about scripted lessons. So the idea within a department, for example, and I see the merit of this in that a scripted teacher exposition would mean that every child's experience and an explanation of a concept would be the same regardless of the classroom that they are being taught in or the teacher that they've got. But faultless communication can also mean that people are scripting the way things are explained to children. And the idea is actually to prevent misconceptions. So we can link this back, can't we, to one of the things that we criticised collaborative learning for, and we said that actually, well, collaborative learning can lead to misconceptions within children. Well, Engelman is saying if we script lessons, then you prevent these misrules, he calls them, this misconception, students learning the wrong content. So I suppose we've got two very different ends of the scale here, haven't we? We've got kind of student-based inquiry-led learning, which again, I know has been a fad in education. And then on the other side, we've gone back, it seems, to this idea of scripting. I mean, do we think staff should be scripting lessons? Text in and let me know, what do you think of that? And I suppose actually we could look at this from lots of different points of view, which would be really cool, because if we're saying, yeah, okay, they should be scripted, well, who scripts them? Does your head of department script them for every lesson? And therefore, does every single teacher have to use the script that's given to them? Because I mean, you've probably guessed by this show, I've got quite a strong personality, and I like to use my personality when I teach. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't plan meticulously, particularly for my teacher exposition, but it does mean that I don't know if somebody else's explanation of something would necessarily be the way I would explain it. But then I suppose, I don't know, is that arrogant? Does that mean that I think my way of explaining something is better than someone else's? I don't know. I feel we could go round in circles with this, couldn't we? Because, I mean, I suppose on the other side, though, are we saying that every teacher should script their lessons before they go in terms of that teacher exposition? But then I can already hear a lot of you saying, well, that's a massive teacher workload. But then I suppose the other side of that is I absolutely, as a lead with teaching and learning, I fully expect teachers to be planning their lessons. And isn't this what scripting a teacher exposition is? Isn't that just a well-planned lesson? I'm going to go on the chat. I feel like I'm just twisting myself up in circles here. I'm going to go on the chat and see what you guys think. So, we've got no. I don't think lessons should be scripted. I like the idea of scripted knowledge to ensure all pupils are receiving the same diet, but not scripted in how to deliver the content. Yeah, I think that is a really great way of putting it, and actually a really good differentiation to make between those two. Scripted knowledge, I suppose, we could rephrase that, couldn't we, as that agreed core concepts, the core knowledge that we want every member of staff to make sure they're focusing on to support the students. That should be scripted. And I suppose that's in our curriculums, isn't it? But that teacher description could be different. But then, Beth, I'm coming back to you again here. I'm sorry, Beth. I feel like every question you're giving me gives me something back. But so what would you say then if you were a head of department and you had someone in your department who, say, you went and watched and you didn't think that their teacher exposition was particularly strong? Is that not a solution if you were to then script that exposition for them? I'm totally talking in hypotheticals here, to be clear, but I don't know. Is that the other side? I think shared resources and shared PowerPoints, etc., can be great, but scripts can stop creativity. Yeah, I agree actually, and I feel like that's quite similar to what I was saying about, do I want my lessons to be scripted for me, or is actually when I explain things in my own very Danny Wally way, partly why it works sometimes with the students I teach? I don't know. Okay, Pat says we use shared PowerPoints for core knowledge, but the style is up to the teacher, hence we swap classes around at Key Stage 3. Yeah, I feel like that's actually quite in agreement with what Kelly said earlier about the shared PowerPoints. Okay, it depends on the audience and the teacher's needs to adapt with the basic scripted knowledge. Yeah, but again, does that mean that you're going to give them a script, but you're then giving them the autonomy to deviate from it? In which case, what's the point in giving them a script? Gosh, I feel like we've gone down a rabbit hole here, guys. I feel like we could talk about this for hours. Model and coach, somebody's put, yeah. But I mean, again, though, I love a bit of modelling. I love it. I love a bit of practicing. I love a bit of modelling and that positive culture that means people feel comfortable in doing that. But my question again would be, where can we facilitate the time for every lesson to be modelled for every member of staff? That's the dream, isn't it? I love a script, but more on calls home to parents. Ooh, scripts for difficult conversations with staff, but not teaching. Teachers need to be flexible. They need to adapt and do what they bring and bring their personality to the classroom. Yeah, I feel like that's very similar to what I've said. Oh, Kelly, that comment's getting a lot of agreement on the chat right now, which is interesting, actually, because I feel like at least we've reached an agreement with that bit. And our agreement is very similar, isn't it, to what we were talking about with Kagan, where it's the middle ground, isn't it? I think what we're doing is we're seeing the strengths in a lot of these approaches, but maybe suggesting that we need to take them with a pinch of salt, which is, amazing. Oh, Bethany's come back to me. I love this. Thank you. I would use department time to share good practice in teaching concepts that were perhaps being delivered less effectively and subject-specific reading throughout department time as the exposition may be poor due to a lack of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, we haven't even touched on that, have we? But yeah, 100%. So actually, it's that idea of supporting our teams, and maybe that somebody said earlier about modelling. Maybe we model to them how we would explain a concept and hope that they take facets of our explanation and put it into their own, but maybe not constrain them. I was laughing with some of the SLT that I'm on today, where I was saying, I used your phrase today, and I copied your sentence in assembly, and I'm sure that wasn't their intention when they said it to me, but I certainly magpie things that people say, and I think, I love that, and I love that explanation, and I love the way you've explained that, and I certainly then put that into my practice, both in and outside of the classroom. So yeah, brilliant. I loved that, guys. I feel like we've reached a kind of natural end there with our direct instruction debate, which I love. So I feel like, as much as we could go on about this for a long time, I am going to ask you to vote, which is possibly unfair because we haven't even managed to go through all the different aspects of direct instruction, but I also think that would take a long time. But as I go to a word from our sponsors and also the latest news, can you jump onto the chat and text in and let me know what are we voting then when it comes to direct instruction? So I remind you, earlier on in the show, we voted cooperative learning strategies like Kagan as a success. So what are we voting more? Kind of teacher-led and teacher exposition focused lessons like direct instruction potentially would advocate for? Are we voting that a success or not? Let me know, text in, I'll go to the news and I'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A group representing 1,400 private schools will press ahead with plans for a legal challenge against the government's introduction of VAT from January, according to the BBC. The Independent Schools Council, the body which includes most independent schools in the UK, has voted to pave the way for legal action which will be brought on behalf of parents, including those with children with special educational needs. A Treasury spokesperson told the BBC they do not comment on potential litigation. Chancellor Rachel Reeves confirmed private schools would no longer be exempt from VAT in the autumn budget, but said the money raised would help to provide the highest quality of support and teaching in the state sector. The government has estimated it would raise £460 million extra to spend on state schools next year, rising to £1.7 billion by 2029-30. The ISC is hoping for a judicial review of the government's policy, which will focus around claims of breaches of the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination, and Article 2, the right to education. The ISC says its legal claimants will be parents who argue they cannot find an alternative education for their children in the state sector, and are likely to include families with children with special educational needs. In an impact assessment, the government confirmed that only those children with a local authority, EHCP, with a private school named on it will be exempt from the VAT policy. The Guardian reports on plans by some UK schools to boost maternity pay to stem the numbers of female teachers in their 30s leaving the profession. Head teachers and charities, according to the article, are warning that more than 9,000 women aged between 30 and 39 left state education last year, and that government will not fix teacher shortages unless it acts to stop experienced women leaving. Experts say alongside a standard maternity pay package for teachers that lags behind many other employers, excessive workload and guilt about not having time for their own children are leading women in this age group to conclude that motherhood is not compatible with teaching. Now, an academy trust which runs schools in Hull and the East Riding of Yorkshire is planning to help, with the CEO saying nobody should have to choose between being seen as a good teacher or a good mum and dad. The trust now approves 98% of all requests for flexible working and has a policy that everyone must be able to attend their own children's sports days and school plays. The trust is also diverging from most of the sector, where teachers get 4 weeks maternity leave at full pay, 2 weeks at 90%, then 12 weeks on half pay. Instead, they'll offer from day one 18 weeks on full pay and 8 on half pay for teachers and support staff. They will also offer uncapped paid leave for women who suffer a miscarriage. Other academy trusts have also enhanced maternity packages. The Department for Education said recruiting and keeping great teachers in our classrooms is vital to improving life chances for all children. We are committed to resetting the relationship with the education workforce and working alongside them to re-establish teaching as an attractive expert profession. The BBC in Scotland reports that a council looks set to drop plans to switch to a 4.5-day school week following consultation. The local authority in Dumfries and Galloway was considering the move to develop and enhance education provision in the region. However, the majority of parents who took part in their survey were against the plans. A council report has recommended maintaining the current school week structure in the face of the feedback. The move was being considered as part of plans to modernise teaching provision, but the early Friday finish was described as yet another headache for families by the union Unison. The findings of the consultation will be taken to an Education Committee meeting on the 8th of November. School staff views were split over the plans, with more in favour than against, but more than a quarter remained unsure. Pupils backed the plans, although a significant number were undecided. Finally, the Department for Education has said it will end its grant scheme for schools choosing to be an academy at the end of this year, and has no plans to continue to run its trust capacity and trust establishment and growth funds. According to the report in Schools Week, trusts waiting to hear about capacity and growth funding bids for this summer's funding round have also been told no cash will be handed out. The government's upcoming Children's Wellbeing Bill will seek to bring the two parts of the sector closer together, requiring academies to follow the national curriculum and cooperate with councils on admissions and pupil place planning. The Confederation of School Trusts said the decisions would make it much more difficult for trusts to support maintained schools that need help. Further details of the story can be found on the Schools Week website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Okay, guys, welcome back, and thank you for sticking with me. And thank you so much for your participation this evening. It has been absolutely amazing to speak to so many different people about their thoughts and experiences on these teaching and learning fads, trends, crazes, whatever it is that we're calling them. I think what's amazing is I feel like we came to an agreement toward the end that actually there is something useful in all of these, but what we possibly as a profession need to reflect on is that idea of going full steam ahead into one way. And I think for me, I look at some of the experiences that we've talked about and shared tonight. You know, should every single classroom, every single day be based around collaborative learning? No, maybe not. But is there room for that in terms of boosting student engagement? Absolutely. Do we need to follow Engelman's direct instruction with capital letters to a T? Possibly not just yet, but equally, is there worth inside it? You know, is there worth behind what he's suggesting and advocating when it comes to effective teacher exposition and effective curriculum planning? Yeah, I personally think there is, and I think from a lot of your comments tonight, you feel the same. So let's leave it there, and maybe we are going to fully sit on the fence and say that there is worth in both, and maybe what we need to do is come up with our own middle ground where we combine all of these different facets and maybe make our own model. And I look forward to talking to you guys about this again. I certainly don't think this is the only time we'll talk teaching and learning. I definitely think we'll come back and we'll talk about, we've got flipped learning, we've got growth mindset, we talked earlier about learning styles. So we've definitely got more to evaluate. We'll just do it on the next show. I'll leave it there, guys, and wish you a very good evening. Thank you so much again for joining. If you are listening on social media, please let me know your thoughts and share the show and let me know your opinions. This has been Danny Wally on The Late Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Good evening, guys.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.